Okay, well, welcome everybody to the WiSys Spark Symposium, Entrepreneurial Mindset for Researchers. As you can see, we have a panel here of entrepreneurs, researchers, research administrators, and many of us who wear multiple hats from those categories. So we hope that you will enjoy this conversation that we have set up with our panelists. But before we get started with our panel, I wanted to just kind of set the stage here a little bit about, why we decided to have this event in the first place. So what is an entrepreneurial mindset? An entrepreneurial mindset is really kind of focused around the idea of seeking and creating opportunities, specifically opportunities that can then be turned into action by using resources smartly and by managing risk, right? So the idea here is, what can you do today from something that you notice might be off in the world to make the world a better place? And specifically, if you think about what it means to be an entrepreneur, one of the things that it is finding opportunity and finding resources that might already exist. And the reason this is interesting for researchers is because as an entrepreneur and a researcher, my allegiances might seem split, but I'm here to tell you that the entrepreneurs came in, took the scientific method from the researchers and rebranded it as their own. So all the researchers who are here, I want you to realize that the entrepreneurial mindset is really not that different from a scientific mindset, a mindset of curiosity and a mindset of, wanting to do better and wanting to improve life. So with that, I want to introduce myself. My name is Adira Sunkara, and I am the manager of ventures at WiSys. I started out my career as a scientist. I always wanted to be a scientist as a child. And as I grew up, I realized that there was an intersection between my scientific curiosity and my interest in being more application and fast-paced, and that's where I kind of turned to entrepreneurism. So I consider myself both a scientist and an entrepreneur, and I'm here to moderate this panel of scientists and entrepreneurs. So what are some of the most important entrepreneurial attributes? The first one that you see here that pops up in this Forbes survey is vision. Vision, work ethic, resilience, positivity, passion, focus, perseverance, and we can go down this list. But as I say these, I hope that the researchers in the audience realize that these are not really that different from the attributes that define a good scientist or a good researcher. So with that, I will stop and have a little poll for our audience here. So if you could all participate in this short 2-question poll. We just want to get to know who is in the audience and what you're trying to get out of this event. Okay, looks like we have most of our participants responded. One more second, there we go. All right. So here's what our audience looks like. We have researchers, we have entrepreneurs, we have researchers who are also entrepreneurs, or maybe I should say entrepreneurs who are also researchers, and a healthy dose of research administrators. That's wonderful. And what do you hope to achieve by practicing an entrepreneurial mindset? I love this. I love that most of you are here because you're not sure and it just sounds interesting. And the fact that you showed up to this event out of curiosity means you're already halfway there, right? I mean, that's as Marcia will tell you in a minute, I'm sure, that's the first hallmark of a good entrepreneur and a good scientist is being curious and following your curiosity. So wonderful. Okay. All right. So without further ado, I'm sure you're not here to listen to me, and you want to hear from our wonderful panelists. I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. And panelists, when I say your name, if you could just, briefly tell our audience your background, why you're here, and your role as an entrepreneur or researcher or both. So let's start with Marcia. Go ahead, Marcia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Har-Bailey. I am an associate professor of entrepreneurship at UW-Platteville. And I am also a social entrepreneur. I started a nonprofit project through my research from my dissertation during my doctoral program that has now is working in Laos. And so I'm connecting students from UW-Platteville to students in Laos. And the other thing I'm going to be talking about more today is my Prototype Your Life challenges that I have that are about creating an entrepreneurship mindset. So it's very much in line with this talk today. Look forward to chatting soon.
Thank you, Marcia. Next up, we have Rob McGath.
Hey, everybody. I am a professor of chemistry at UW-La Crosse. I would be one who definitely started out as a straight researcher. And I consider myself a researcher entrepreneur now, although I haven't done anything completely separate from UWL. Been working in conjunction with WiSys for several years now on a couple of different projects. The basic theme of them is green chemistry and catalysis. And kind of how I got into this was being an environmentalist. The realization came to me after a certain period of time that all the great green chemistry ideas in the world aren't going to do anything unless they're adopted. So that you adopted widely by industry. So that's sort of how I got here.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, and then next we have Deborah Lundeen from WiSys.
Hello, I'm Deborah. I am from WiSys. I am the manager for research development here at the organization. I've been here for a couple of years, but my main role and the role for research development at WiSys is to work with faculty and staff at the participating campuses to kind of help get faculty and staff towards submitting proposals for external funding, research, programmatic. And I think, for me, I found a connection with what Adira is doing when she made a presentation internally a few months ago. And the way she presented, the entrepreneurial path, it really spoke to me, because the way in which a researcher pursues ideas and funding and how they pursue external funding really go quite hand in hand. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all our panelists for being here. So I forgot to mention that, audience, if you have questions for our panelists as we go along, please feel free to put those in the chat. We'll probably get to them at the end of our scheduled questions, but I assure you we'll have plenty of time for audience questions. So don't be shy. Go ahead and put those questions in the chat as you think of them. Okay, well, Marcia, I want to start with you. You mentioned your Prototype Your Life app or program that you're working on. And, one of the things that I think happens, it's human nature, right? As you're walking through life, you identify a lot of pain points, right? It could be anything like the line at the bank is too long today, or it could be, it's such a pain to carry my, field samples all the way to the lab every time I need to do a test and then come back to the field and get another sample, right? And so we know that researchers especially are notoriously critical. If anyone's ever read a peer review on someone's grant, I mean, they can get pretty critical of ideas and of things. So how do we help kind of harness this power of critical thinking, especially that scientists and researchers have, And how do you kind of harness that into something more actionable? Could you talk a little bit about some of your exercises and programs?
Sure. So I've been doing this since about 2014, when I was introduced to the Lean Launchpad curriculum, which is the way, exactly what Adir was talking about, with the change from a more traditional way of teaching entrepreneurship, that there's a textbook and you answer the questions at the end and take a test, versus like doing it more like you would do chemistry or engineering, where you're like in a laboratory type environment. And so that's essentially the way that we teach entrepreneurship now, is that we write down our guesses, our hypothesis on something called a business model canvas. And then we get out of the building and see, are the people that we think care about this problem, do they actually care about this problem? Or does somebody else care about this problem? Does anybody care about this problem that I have a problem with, but maybe nobody else does? And how much are they willing to pay for it, for example? So I started to, I have a lot of experience with leadership development training and things like that too. And what I started to do is give my students these essentially comfort zone challenges. And I always incorporated a reflection component to the assignment. And I couldn't believe how impactful these kind of silly challenges, I'll give you a couple examples in a minute, how much they can really put you in that position of the way you might feel as an entrepreneur, that we really feel kind of across the board, but it applies so much more to entrepreneurs because they're the leaders of the company or the leaders of the new thing that you're building. So one of the activities that I like to do right away with students is something called rejection therapy. And there is a TED Talk and book associated with this. And if you want more information, I'll put my email in the chat. But you have to go out and get rejected every day for 10 days. And there's so many great lessons from that. And, there's anybody who's written a grant and it didn't get approved, applied for a job and didn't get an interview. I mean, there's so many different ways that we are rejected in life, and being able to look for the no and not be afraid of you're not being attached to what that outcome is makes a huge difference. There's a couple other ones that relate to like time management. So overcoming rejection and failure, habit formation, communication skills, all of these types of things that, as I said before, relate to all of us. These are good things to personally and professionally develop. But if you are going to be the person that's actually leading this, if you don't have the drive to do it, it's not going to move forward. So that's why there's such importance. And on that image that you showed us, that vision was high and the drive was high too.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. And you make a very good point about the fear of no, right? And part of this is also learning from your failures, right? So if someone does say no, why do they say no? And yeah, Marcia, if we'll do a follow-up email to all of our attendees, and we can include some of the links to the YouTube video and books that you've mentioned. So I'll follow up with you on that. Thank you. So kind of turning to you a little bit, Rob, you're a researcher, as you said, that's where you started out, but you've had some very interesting and cool ideas and inventions that you've disclosed to WiSys. Could you tell us a little bit about, how did you identify a problem? What made you say, you know what, this is a problem that I feel like I need to come up with a solution for?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always a certain amount of serendipity in research. And so there was a series of compounds that we had discovered, and I had kind of been thinking about, well, these are new, but what, they're unique, but what might these be useful for? Coupled with that, I'm an environmentalist and very passionate about that. And being a chemist and an environmentalist can be a strange situation because chemistry's created a lot of environmental problems through, I guess I would say misuse. And so we got into green chemistry, and specifically when we looked at the compounds that we had made, they looked a lot like active sites and enzymes in nature. And we looked at that, and not just me, but some friends of mine who are in the field. And I kind of identified the issue of toxic metals used in catalysis and some really important industrial processes that have traditionally relied on things that you really don't want to be putting into the environment. And so that was kind of what got me into it. And again, really the realization that a green chemistry idea can make for a great publication, but if it's never adopted, it's not going to change anything in the environment. And if nobody can make money with it, it will never be adopted. And so really, I'm still a green chemist, but this is the best way for me to have impact, I think, is through getting into more commercializable things. And as I've done that, I found it to be incredibly fascinating too. And I've learned so much from the folks at WiSys. So I guess thank you again. But that's sort of been my path to it. And now really all the research we do is really very application oriented, but it's not less research. It's still scientific research. It's just focused. So.
Thank you, Rob. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of your process to get to that more focused solution fit, if you will?
Yeah, the process is really, as you said, it's really like any other research that you do, where let's just say you're trying to make some new compound just because it would be cool. You're going to try things. They're going to maybe not work. They're going to maybe not, maybe that creates another project too. You never know. But when you're trying to do, at least for me, the way it works for me, when you're trying to do application-oriented research, let's say now we're trying to solve the problem of sulfur compounds in fossil fuels, and those cause a lot of pollution. It's the same kind of thing. You try something and then you go look and you realize, okay, this catalyst works, but it's going to cost, $700,000 for a kilogram. That's not really, that's not a failure, but that's an, okay, let's try something else. Let's think of something else moment. And so it really is. I've never really thought about that entrepreneurship involves the scientific method, but you're completely right. And I don't even know if I'm an entrepreneur yet because I haven't started a company or a startup yet, but it's application oriented and we've got patents, so I guess it qualifies. But yeah, it really is. Let's try make an observation, try to refine, but not just on the basis of this paper you want to publish, also on the basis of who might adopt this, who might be interested in, dropping a few $1 million and changing a plant, the way a plant works. Because you learn these things in conversations with industrial people. Like, yeah, well, we can make this compound. Well, okay, yeah, we're gonna have to change all our equipment out now and build a new plant. Oh, so you're saying you want something that will work in the equipment you have already. Those kinds of things. And so it is iterative. It's definitely iterative. Mm-hmm. It's very much like doing basic science.
Yeah, thank you for that. And coming from the science field, especially, I'm a biomedical engineer, and it's very true in the medical field as well, where you have these brilliant engineers come up with the coolest technologies to apply to, you know, a medical problem that they have perceived, and they go to the surgeon or the physician and say, here's this cool new device I made. And they said, well, that's not really going to work because it doesn't work with these 50 other pieces of equipment that we also use. So that's a very good point about, you know, kind of getting out there and actually talking to the people who would be implementing your solution. I think that also ties into what Marcia said about the get out of the building exercise, right? Get out of your ivory tower exercise.
Well, you realize that these people are out in a field in West Texas in the dust trying to, you know, they're not in your lap with a Schlink line, you know?
Right, or a fume hood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So Deborah, you know, kind of to Rob's point, a lot of times science is driven by curiosity and by saying, hey, you know, it sounds like a cool thing. Like, I would really like to know the answer to this question, right? And you might not actually know, like again, Rob said, what the people in West Texas are doing, right? What the problems are that people are facing in the field or in a particular industry. Can you tell us about some shortcuts that researchers can take to find those opportunities and to, you know, well, essentially be opportunistic about focusing their passion and their vision for whatever the problem is that they want to solve?
Sure. And just quickly to Marcia, I'd like to hear more about your rejection therapy, because I think that would be quite helpful in the world of grant seeking as well. And I can talk about that more later. But so when I do my grant writing workshops, you know, one of the things I emphasize to attendees is that, you know, the first most important thing really isn't just what funding is available, right? And that is the idea itself, right? And so for me, it's about maintaining some kind of, you know, written journals on ideas, questions. If you have a question, that doesn't mean it's not been answered. And so then that's where you take your ideas and your questions and you turn to the literature to see, first of all, you know, have these questions been addressed, approached? Have they found solutions? What are the solutions? And maybe kind of going back to what Rob was saying, well, maybe there was a solution, but the solution, you know, causes more problems or is cost prohibitive, right? So it's really not solving a problem. And so so if you can exhaust the literature search, you know, to really hone in on, you know, where that gap still remains, that's helpful. And now, I mean, the caveat, of course, being is that people might be still in the publication process, but you know, that's a very thin edge of where you are currently. And then that would almost probably take maybe reaching out to some of the researchers who are in the same field as you, or where you're looking to go to see what they're working on, because that could also create collaborations, partnerships, all kinds of cool things. So definitely publications, conferences and networking, honestly, would be a great opportunity again to learn maybe where that field is even more currently than maybe through publication. And when you go to those conferences, you get to network with potential collaborators in those fields, but you also then get to interact with likely program officers from federal agencies and other foundations who work in that same space. And they too are in those spaces and conferences. They too are trying to gather where is the field currently so that they can maybe plan for future funding programs. So that's all good information. But in terms of like current funding opportunities, looking at the mission agencies that most relate to the field you're working in, whether if it's health, you can be looking at NIH or other mission agencies such as the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society. But again, you're going to want to pinpoint the agencies that, of course, are most mirroring the fields that you're working in. And you can kind of get a sense from the current calls for proposals what it is that they're looking to fund, right? They're always going to be looking for researchers who are going to drive forward the mission that they are trying to fulfill themselves. And then lastly, you know, for those who are in the UW system, all of the campuses have access to what's called the Pivot Funding Database. And it's access of like tens of thousands of funding opportunities at the federal level, the global level, and foundation, professional associations. And of course, those calls for proposals will reflect the current thinking of what agencies are looking to fund.
Thank you, Deborah. And if anyone's interested in learning more about using Pivot, Deborah actually has a webinar, and I just put the link in the chat, and you should be able to access that through the WiSys website. So as you might have, go ahead, Marcia, you wanted to say something?
I was just gonna say, I have something that I wanted to say earlier, and I was trying to get it out so fast, and it totally connects with what Deborah was just talking about. And that's my own experience of moving an idea forward through our own sources of funding through the UW system. And so I had this question of, why am I getting like such thought-provoking experiences from my students with doing these challenges? Like, what is it about this? So I applied for the Wisconsin Teaching Fellows and Scholars as a fellow and did that. And so I was able to dive into the literature review like Deborah was talking about and learn more. And I did some testing over several semesters, and I learned more about which activities had the most impact and things like that, and was able to pivot my design as a result. And then I was thinking, I want to take this off of paper and put it into something digital that the students can interact with and that will be useful to them. And so then I was thinking, I was talking to Adira and she said, why don't you apply for the App Start Challenge? And so I applied for the App Start Challenge. And while I wasn't one of the finalists, I was a semi-finalist, and it was an amazing experience to go through. I learned a lot. And then this summer, I've been participating in the Idea Hub Summer Accelerator Program. I've now applied for the Idea Advance program and hoping to do the Level Up Accelerator through Venture Home. So I just want to share this, and this is as a social science, which I know that there's been a lot of information coming from WiSys that it's not all hard science. The social sciences can lead to other entrepreneurial activity as well, and things that benefit society in different ways. So I wanted to mention that people should be thinking about that and looking into those opportunities to just keep moving your ideas forward.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. And that's, again, that's fun. That's one of the things, right? Putting yourself out there. I mean, I've seen you do that many times, and you're all the better for it, right? So as you might have guessed, our focus today is really kind of heavy on the problem side, right? It's really kind of pinpointing, how do you figure out what problems are worth solving? And we've heard from our panelists, and we've heard, ideas about doing a literature survey, whether it's scientific literature, market literature, whether it's a simple Google search to see if there's any products out there that actually, do what you think needs to be done, and why aren't those taking off? Why aren't those solving the problem that you think is a problem? Rob mentioned kind of talking to the industry, talking to your end users. Then there's all of these resources that are available through the UW system, through federal grants, through state government grants, through collaborations, through networking. So there really are a lot of different strategies to use while kind of identifying your problem. And it also bleeds into our second part of our program, which is going to focus on validating the problem, right? So as scientists, we're so often hypothesis driven, but our hypotheses are usually on the outcome side, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to design this experiment, and I have a hypothesis about what the results of this experiment are going to be. So part of the entrepreneurial mindset is to take that same framework, that logical framework of the scientific method, and not just apply it to the solution, but also apply it to the problem, right? So, why do you think that this problem is worth solving, essentially? And what are the assumptions that you're making when you think you're coming up with a solution? And how do you validate those assumptions? So Marcia, kind of going back to you, what are some of the tools that entrepreneurs like you or the students that you teach entrepreneurship to, what are some of the tools that they use to validate the problem that they're addressing?
So they often use the business model canvas, as I mentioned before, and we can send more information for those that don't know about it. But it's essentially like a one-page business plan of all of your guesses about who you think your customers are and what the problem is that you're solving and how you would fund it and things like that. So I have a funny story of a student that got out of the building, so to speak. So he went out to interview customers, potential customers, and he had this great idea. Now, this is quite a while ago. I will say it was probably from about 2013, 2014. But he is an avid hunter, and he had this idea about doing something where it was essentially like a life alert for hunters who are sitting up in tree stands, because as you likely probably know, that people fall out of tree stands every year and get really hurt. Hunters do. And there's also obviously lots of other reasons why there might be an emergency in the middle of the woods where you're far away from a car. Now there are more things integrated into cell phones and stuff, but at the time it was pretty revolutionary. And so he was talking to people. There were lots of people that were excited about it. He started to do more customer interviews with his potential customers. And he kept hearing the same thing from these hunters. And that was, sounds cool, but I don't think I'd actually use it. And he did this during the gun hunting season. And so it was around Thanksgiving. He was home and talking about it around the kitchen table. And he realized that he was talking to the wrong customer. He had the wrong customer. All of the wives and mothers of the men that were hunting. Now this, I know obviously women hunt too, but it was very dominated by men in his family. They all said, hey, if that existed, I would buy it for you to wear so that I know if there's a problem. And that was a really great example of sometimes the person that buys your solution is not the user.
Thank you, Marsha. I love that story. So switching over to you, Deborah, when we think about that, Marsha's got the story, I think, can be applied to research as well, right? Because a critical part of the grant writing process is to convince the reviewers of the significance of your research. And to me, that's a classic problem of you're selling to someone who might not be using your product, right? Because reviewers can come from different fields. So do you have any tips or suggestions on how do you leverage sort of the existing literature or your customer interviews or whatever it is to make a strong first impression and to kind of convey the validity of the problem that you're solving?
Sure. So when you're in the grant writing process, whether it's NIH and your specific aims, which is one page, or you're looking at something like the National Science Foundation, where you're looking at about maybe a page and a quarter, those are really the hook spots for the reviewers to keep reading your proposal. And there's a lot of supportive resource literature that talks about literally how you boil down your project to these fine points and be able to punch them up enough so that you get the reviewers to keep reading. So for something like significant aims, you have one page, one single space page to, and it literally goes down paragraph by paragraph, and actually within paragraph by paragraph, it will say, this is your first sentence, this is your second sentence. And really it is about being able to clearly articulate in one, maybe two sentences, the breadth and depth of the problem that you have perceived. And some of that's also going to be driven by what you have discovered in literature, right? And so you're going to say, you're going to try to attach or connect that problem to the state of the world today. Like, you know, what is the true concern and that is out there that needs to be solved. And it really has to be directly connected to the mission of the agency you're writing to, or otherwise it's going to fall on deaf ears, right? So the connection of who you're choosing to submit to really does play a role in that. But then, you know, beyond that, the idea of leveraging your literature, you have to be able to state correctly where the literature, where the knowns are right now, and making sure that you're very aware of where all those knowns are. And that's why you have to stay current on the literature, so that then you can juxtapose that against where that gap is, what gap are you going to fall into, and how you're going to fill that. And then you also have to answer the question as to, well, what happens if you don't do this research? If it's not addressed, will the world end tomorrow, right? And so you have to be able to say, what's going to happen if you don't approach this particular project? And that's a lot. That's a lot of scene setting in a very short amount of time. And quite honestly, for me, I think it's a very iterative process. You really have to work with colleagues inside and outside, and also with the program officers to say, do I have it? Have I refined it enough? Do you get it? And are you on board with what I'm doing? I mean, because kicking the tires before submission is really critical.
Thanks, Deborah. And, you know, speaking of terminology, it's also interesting to think about what entrepreneurs call the value proposition. And that really is very similar to defining your research statement. And I'm sure Marcia can attest to this. And I've personally struggled with this, where you know what the problem you're trying to solve is. And if you just had an entire page to explain it, you'd get your point across, but you don't, you know. And to condense all of that information into 1 or 2 sentences about why what you're doing is important it's really, really difficult. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. So I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything more to add on this.
Yes, actually I do. The other thing I think where the skill comes in is being able to talk about it in plain terms, right? To be able, because you don't have a very long runway. Like I said, you have a page, and maybe you even have less in the entrepreneurial space to be able to convey your idea, right? And so you really have to figure out in as many or as least words as possible, but completely convey what you're trying to do. And that takes time, honestly. Writing a proposal and, you know, like maybe weeks worth of time it's just not feasible. And because you have to use and find that plain language that really translates what you're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. And this will be part of the follow-up that we'll send out. But, you know, if you kind of Google this, writing a value proposition, and I think there's more resources on the entrepreneurship side. That's why I kind of wanted to make that connection between, you know, the terminology that's used. But if you kind of Google how to write a value proposition, you'll find lots of resources online. But my favorite are kind of these Mad Libs style things where it'll, you know, just have blanks, right? So it'll say like our blank, right? And you enter your product or service, and helps, who does it help? What do they want to do? What's the job that needs to be done? And how is your product helping it? And then you can be quantitative by, you know, reducing effort by 20% or whatever it is, right? So I think there are certain tools to kind of help you put your thoughts into that condensed form. And then once you have it, then you can, of course, revise and wordsmith it. So we'll, again, like I said, we'll kind of follow up with some of those tools and resources after this meeting. meeting. But Rob, have you had that experience? Have you had this struggle of trying to convey what it is that you're trying to do in a very short?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I think I was going to say it's probably for me personally the most difficult and most important thing in every proposal. And I end up writing one, and then I write the proposal, and then I go back and rewrite it because I realized that what I really thought the problem was isn't really the problem, but in the process of writing a proposal. And you're right too, you can't do it in a couple of weeks. It's a semester. I mean, it's the summer. It's not a quick thing. But yeah, I've definitely struggled with literally how to make all of this fit into this little guy. The other thing is that as a researcher, we all think that our research is fascinating and the coolest thing ever, and we want to be working on it, but we're not reviewing our own proposals. So it's a really important exercise to figure out, all right, yeah, I'm in love with this project because it's my project, but how do I get them to fall in love with it enough to actually fund me to do it? And that's kind of the mental exercise you have to go through. It doesn't mean it's not cool, but you have to be able to connect to people who haven't been in your lab doing your exact work. I think we all do that. We all have to do that,
Yeah, I love that. And I think, again, such a strong parallel to what entrepreneurs feel too.
Mm-hmm.
You have this passion for your idea and you have this vision, and you've said how important those attributes are. But then at some point you do have to step back and say, am I in love with this idea because it's my idea, or am I in love with this idea because it's an idea that solves a problem worth solving? So that's a really good point, Rob. The other thing I've heard from people is never fall in love with your first idea, right? And it's the same thing as you're saying, is you write this proposal, or you go through your customer interviews, or you write your business plan, whatever it is that you're doing, it's worth kind of going back to your title slide or your abstract or your value proposition and see if those still align after all of the work you've done and taking in all that feedback. Which kind of brings me to our last point, which is finding that problem solution fit. I mean, we've focused a lot on identifying the problem so far. So let's assume you've identified a problem, you've validated that it truly is a problem and somebody needs to solve it and that you're the best person to solve it. Can you tell us a little bit about, and this is open to anybody anybody who wants to answer on the panel, but how do you go about then checking if your solution that you've come up with actually aligns with and solves the problem that you set out to solve?
I can tell you how that's worked for me, and I'm still in the process of learning this, but it comes from trying to sell it to people who are going to use it, you hope. And an example from our work is we created a catalyst, and it worked really well, and it did what it was supposed to do, and it was really cool and a nice bit of science. And this sounds like an obvious question to ask, but it wasn't obvious to me walking into this. Is we got it patented, and you get into some discussions with companies who would be potential users of this or licensees of the technology. And they say, well, what we're working with right now, we can make for a couple dollars a pound. And I remember thinking, what can you get for a couple dollars a pound? Well, charcoal or sand, And so we're now working with charcoal because that was the check, right? This is going to cost more than anybody is ever going to pay to produce or buy this stuff. And it might work really great. It might be a nice bit of science, but that was the check for us. It's too expensive. Find something cheaper. And then you have to take your knowledge of your field and try to use the concept of analogy and say, okay, what can I do that's like this from a scientific standpoint, giving it a chance to work, but that I can buy for a couple dollars a pound. That, you know, that's the process for us, is actually checking with the people who are trying to get to license the technology and having them say, nope, costs way too much.
That's, yeah, no, and this, you know, ties into what everybody's been saying from, you know, since we started this, but it kind of also ties into this idea of assumptions, right? And one of the exercises that entrepreneurs or this entrepreneurial mindset is focused on is managing risk. You have to be willing to take risks, but at the same time, you have to evaluate your assumptions as you're taking those risks. And one of the exercises that I have entrepreneurs do when they're going through our venture home program is say, list out all of the assumptions that you think will make your business successful or a failure, right? And oftentimes it's sort of the people will focus on the technical risk. Well, I don't know if this, I don't know if I can create this reagent, or sometimes it might even go as far as I don't know if I can scale the production of this reagent in a cost-effective way, and that's getting closer. But almost always the biggest, riskiest assumption ends up being, is somebody going to buy this, right? And Rob, you went straight to there, right? You went straight there and said, okay, well, what does the price point have to be for you to buy this? And so you attacked that riskiest assumption and started from there. So I think that's a really great story around that. Marcia or Deborah, if you want to pitch in about sort of this idea of risk and assumptions and how you validate them, feel free to.
I mean, I guess for me, what I would say is when we're talking about problem solution fit, number one, I think when you find yourself writing proposals for research, what will help strengthen your proposal, number one, would be, I've done this before. I've gotten some of these results. I've gotten promising results. And so we're going to, apply these methods to the next level question. But in terms of, I guess, risk, what I would also say is one of the biggest take-home points that I keep telling people during every workshop I do is you need to talk to the program officer. You need to share with them what it is that you're planning to do and how you're planning to do it. They may either say, we just funded something like that, or yeah, but did you think about these other pitfalls, right? And so the whole point really is to talk to the program officer and figuring out, what is it that they're willing to invest in terms of your project, if at all, right? And, the idea of the fear of no is really significant among a lot of people that I talk to. There is such a trepidation about talking to program officers, but for me, I say, do you want to waste weeks or months writing a proposal that will probably never get funded because you didn't do that customer discovery to know whether or not they would even look at your proposal? And on top of that, they're paid to offer this kind of guidance, right? They could guide you to other programs or say, yes, let's do some of these tweaks to your methods that would make it more competitive. I mean, it's a valuable conversation to have. And then I guess the other thing is, you're proposing a solution, but I think every reviewer knows, and every probably researcher knows, that not everything will go by as planned in your methods, right? There's always going to be an assumption that something could go awry. And instead of denying the possibility of some of those events happening, you then start saying, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. And we will mitigate the risk of that kind of failure by alternating our methods in these ways to make sure that we can still produce the outcomes that we are proposing to accomplish. And being able to acknowledge those in a proposal tells the reviewer you really thought through the process and where things could kind of go off the road.
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, I never thought about the risk of asking a program officer, but that's one which has a very high risk, because if they're not interested, then you're not getting funded. But the way to mitigate that risk is so easy, right? It's an email or a phone call. So thank you for
Right,
sharing.
the fear of rejection of your idea is very palatable
yeah.
there.
Okay, so I do want to make sure we have time for our audience if they have any questions. So anyone in the audience, if you have questions, and if you would like, you can unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask, or you can type it into the chat. It's up to you.
Hi, this is Anna. I'm at UWSP, and I have a weird dual appointment. So I'm called an integrated specialist. So I teach and I do outreach through extension. So I'm a director of a center, well, actually 2 centers, but this concerns one of them, this Center for Land Use Education. And so quite some time ago now, I was asked to do yet another PowerPoint. Can you please talk about planning and zoning in Wisconsin? Like, and how can our community and our leadership program think about that? So it's very 101, super basic. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do another PowerPoint. So I designed a game. It was a board game. So we've created it into an actual board game. We're terrible at marketing. Lay it out there. I do not have any idea how to do that. And now we have requests to bring it online. So I've hired a couple of students. They're getting pretty close, so we can test it. But now I'm just at the point of like, okay, how do we find server space and market it? Do we want a paywall? Like, there's all these questions around now what? Like, it's designed. Maybe we should have thought about that long ago, but we didn't.
Well, before I let the panel answer the question, I just want to give you kudos for being so opportunistic, right? I mean, you saw a pain point. It was your own pain point. You said PowerPoints are boring. Maybe no one's even listening to them, right? Maybe that's why you're having to do it so many times. And you found a solution. And so I think that's great. And you found opportunity in using students, et cetera. And so I think you were absolutely on the right path there in terms of, what's next. It's okay not to know what's next when you started on this journey. So don't feel bad about that. I'll let Marcia maybe chime in a little bit on that. But we can also reach out to you through WiSys and kind of follow up offline.
That's exactly what I was thinking. WiSys Venture Home. My comments brief, but I think that's a fantastic idea to gamify something that is a really interesting topic and an important topic, and to help us frame and design new programs, the way we welcome new businesses. All of that is definitely connected to what you're talking about. So I love the idea. I will just say to keep moving forward, and you can feel free to chat to me if you want. I'd love to talk to you on another channel.
Great, thank you. Brad, do you have a question? I see you unmuted.
Well, I was just going to introduce myself to Anna as the regional associate at WiSys who works with UW Stevens Point. And actually, I was starting to write you an email, Anna, and now it'll be a different email. But I echo Adira's kudos to you for seizing initiative and doing all that you've done. And this seems on first pass to be exactly the kind of thing that WiSys can help you with. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you told us about it. And we'll follow up. But I think you're right. There's nothing wrong with what you've done to date. In fact, asking for help when you need it is one of the entrepreneurial things that scientists should do. So
Well, good. I know I've seen WiSys a lot, but I never knew how to or what to do with WiSys. So I'm
You
glad
do.
you are the right people to connect with. So that's awesome.
Thanks, Anna. We might have time for one more quick question if anybody has a burning question. No? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Marcia just put her email in the chat, or you can also reach out to WiSys. Now that you know what WiSys is, maybe. You can reach out to us and we'd be happy to put you in touch with any of our panelists or help you in any other way that we can. And yeah, thank you all for being here. And please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with some additional resources and YouTube videos, maybe some games that you can play to be more entrepreneurial. It might be a couple of days while we kind of put all this information together, but keep an eye out for that in your inbox. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.